some years, I don't want to overstate
In
this,
ninth grade.
Robin, but I don't want to understate it either. Some years we are able to staff Spanish 1. We haven't been able to staff French 1 for quite a few years. But I'm guessing, given a 30 to 35 student increase next year, the likelihood is that without a staffing change, we will not be able to offer either. This year, we were not able to offer either.
And one other question, I'm just curious how we compare with other high schools in terms of what languages they offer beyond French or Spanish. Is that just basically the menu?
I mean, we do have Latin as well. Some schools have, if there's a third or fourth language, there's some schools that are offering Mandarin. I don't think that's a lot. We offered it for a couple of years, and maybe we can try to do that again at some point. But I would say right now, if I were to offer an additional language, I would try Mandarin again.
And I know that some school districts offer German also.
And this may be what Jessica's going to say, which is that some schools are beginning to offer, or at least consider offering, sign language as a one language class. Is that what you would? No? Okay, then.
There's another population of kids that need that first level, because in the middle school, sometimes we have to figure out what are the priorities. So
Right.
services take over for foreign language, and then the assumption is they're going to do it again in high school. So there's some different.
And I would say that's true, not just for special education students, that when you have the ability to offer a first year of language in the high school, then it gives you more flexibility in the middle school to really target. I think we would all agree that being able to speak English well is more important, at least at that age, having those literacy skills, than starting a world language. So.
I think it seems like quite a large gap to not have a Spanish one or French one offering freshman year. It seems like a pretty large gap myself.
I have a question. I don't know, it's probably Howard can answer. I know we are not taking full advantage of PATHs, meaning that our number of students is small.
Yep.
So, do we have to pay lump sum to PATHs, or can we do it per students as well? Is that an option, and can we look into that?
So I will tell you what I think is the right answer, and Catherine will probably correct me. I think that we pay a figure that's based on a formula about the number of students that you send to PATHs in any given year, but I think the calculation is either a year or two out. So in other words, our number next year will reflect not what's projected for next year, but it's either the number that was this year or 2 years ago. I'm not sure which that is. I don't think there's an option to do it a different way.
Okay.
And if you don't mind, I can add to it. Under your high school tab, there is a handout from PATH showing the actual calculation of the assessment. So they're basing it on 2 years enrollment from October 2015 to October 2016. So really, technically, it's 3 years out. So it is kind of lagging.
Okay.
And I will also say, I won't believe it because it's not part of budget, is we have really ramped up our effort to market PATHs,
Yeah.
to increase awareness of PATHs. We have not yet gotten to the point where there's a critical mass of students going to PATHs in the sense that it's recognized as, I'm seriously wanting to do this. But this year, we had Kevin Stilton, who's a principal at PATHs, come and present to all of our 10th graders to be introduced to what PATHs has to offer. We're making, and we often will identify a student as a kid who really should be considering this, and try to persuade them to consider it.
And also, in reference to the EPS, I believe, when you were looking at that, did you study or look into how our comparable schools and other districts are in reference to our formula when you plug in the numbers?
So I can do that. I have not done, I would be
Okay.
happy to do that. In fact, I'd be interested in
To see what it was going to look like, yeah.
But I don't have that right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
John, is it,
I can add a little to that, because I've looked at it a little bit, and part of the challenge is that there's not many schools that are this size that are comparable. There are ones that are smaller and ones that are bigger, and those have different implications of how you
Yeah.
can staff them in terms of both the breadth that you offer and other things.
Yeah.
And so
I understand.
It's hard
Very
to
tough
find
to do
the
apple to
direct
apples, yeah.
comparable ones.
Yeah.
I just wanted to sort of highlight that, Jeff and I had a little bit of this discussion around this, just to sort of, to understand it, because the model that's out there that people understand is this is how the funding works, this is what is sort of what the state endorses in terms of levels of staffing. That, as I said, that's not necessarily best practice. What EPS funds deviates from best practice significantly in a number of areas. We may touch on that later, but in
Okay.
respect to the high school and the high school staffing, I think a couple of key points that sort of came out in our discussion with Jeff have to do with, the type of school, in terms of both graduation rates and the destination. 90+% going to college is a big number. You have to staff your school differently if that's what your population and goals are, than you might if your goal is 60% or 70%, which is the average in Maine. You have to decide what you're trying to do and how you staff it, is also in terms of, it's not only, we didn't talk about this piece, but it's not only just the 90%, in some respects, it's also what schools are they going to, because it's actually a pretty impressive list that come out of here. And what those schools are hoping and expecting to see in terms of breadth and rigor of program. And so if I'm proud of what we have at the high school and the level of performance that it is, but we staff our schools to reach those goals, and, that's not saying we can't do better. We don't try to do better, but I think we need to be careful about stewardship over some things that are really important that we've created, and to be mindful of that stewardship and not be careless. That it's easy to do. It's actually, to get a 0 to 1% dropout rate, that's hard. And we should be really proud of it. And if we want to change what we're doing, there are impacts to that. So we can't, part of this is, I really want to make people understand, this is how and why we staff our school departments the way we do. Why we have the breadth of program, why we have the class loads that we have, how we manage those pieces. We've got a overall student population, yours is gonna be up a bit, but our staff is still gonna be flat a bit. So, that's the piece that I really want to come out of this, and so, like we talked about, your head count is flat, your non-personnel costs are essentially flat or down, I think. Flat.
Non-personnel costs are flat, yeah.
So, that's the piece that I really want to make sure that people understand of how we do what we do and why we do it. And it takes a little bit of unpeeling the onion to talk about what do we have in this school that is different than the average school. And as people have heard me say many times over and over again, we want to be very careful to let people know we're succeeding because of what we do, not in spite of what we do. And I think that when you look at the numbers, like the college numbers and the graduation rates, it's very clear that we're succeeding and we're doing some things differently. And some of that I find directly attributable to the way we have staffed these schools.
Yeah, can I have two small clarifying questions? Back on the third page, you had what programs have been able to create without any increase, and I had two questions about that. Can you just explain what a concurrent enrollment class is?
Yes. Sorry,
Just
I
define that?
interchangeably use concurrent and dual, and then I explained dual.
Okay, so it's dual.
Same thing, it's a
Okay.
dual enrollment class. In fact,
Great.
that's the more accurate description that I should have used.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted some clarification. And then I was wondering, and then after that I have one comment, but if you can, it sounds very impressive that you can take on 30 to 40 new students without increasing the staff, and that you say you're expanding the robotics programs and course offerings without adding staff. And that's excellent. I'm just wondering if you can give some examples of how you can take on that much more when we already know that teacher loads are quite a bit without increasing staff. Like if you can maybe speak to that a little bit for us,
So
to
there
create some
are,
clarification.
well, number one, there are some of these areas, for example, student-driven learning,
Mm-hmm.
the achievement center
Mhm.
staffing and that sort of thing. There is a little bit of wiggle room to go up or down a little bit and bring teachers back into the regular classroom for a little while. What I don't wanna do, because what we're looking at is an eighth grade bubble. I know there's another one in a couple of years, but it's not as large. So what I don't wanna do is add somebody for 1 year and then have to, or add a whole bunch of partial people for 1 year and then reduce it. I would rather see how we can look at the staff where there is some wiggle room to use them a little bit differently next year when we have to encounter a bubble. And I'm pretty confident we'll be able to address that. There will be a slight uptick in class sizes without any question, because that's what happens. It's all just numbers. But I think it's manageable, and I think it's better than trying to add to the staff for 1 year and then we have to reduce it the next. That doesn't seem to me good solution.
Thanks for that clarification. And then the last thing that I would just like to comment on is, at the end, when you talked about, you know, needs that are not in the budget proposal, and the school resource officer, and how that has been sort of on hold waiting for a grant, and your comment of it being maybe something that we don't wait on a grant for. And I'd just like to speak to what's going on a little bit, that on TV, there was a news ad for a program that they were putting up, and there might have been 20 students in the audience, and the newscaster, like I said, this was a commercial, said, "Who of you feels anxious at your school right now and nervous to go to school?" And every single child there raised their hand. And so the school resource officer, I just want to give a shout out to, it may just provide a lot of support, emotional support and stability and a sense of safety for a student going into this school. I think it's very trying times for them. And so, not just from the perspective of us as parents or employees or administrative staff, but from the perspective of the students, they may feel quite relieved to have that type of a figure in the school. So I'm just giving a shout out, thinking I think that's something that should really be considered and thought of.
So may I, you had your hand up first, maybe.
It's okay. Quickly, it's, people who've been around know that I've been an active proponent of the school resource officer since I joined the board, having worked in another school system with one, and very friendly with the school resource officer who actually works at Falmouth. And the relationships that these people build, it's not, a cop coming in to arrest kids. It's just a very, very, it's a special position that does, they build relationships, they support. And I think, it's a different time than every other time that I've wished to bring this up. And I think I agree that, it can build in that sense of, okay, we've got this, a little extra layer here. This may help calm me down. I don't know, but I'm just piggybacking and saying it's been on my mind since even this fall, like, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? I think it's positive.
So may I speak too? I want to just jump in on this as well. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to meet with school administrators and school nurses and the police chief. And the reason we were meeting, actually this meeting was called for early last week. It had nothing to do with what we've been going through recently. And it was really largely in response to a conversation that I had a week or two ago with Mr. Phillips, who ironically is in the room with us this evening. And Mr. Phillips was saying that his feeling is that we've got an increased level of responsibility, and I'm going to use the word tension, in high schools, especially high schools. And there may even be a level of fear that we're not, or emotions that we did not have 10 years ago in high schools. And so it isn't just the students that I think would feel some degree of calm and support from a school resource officer. I think that your faculty at the, I mean, and the meeting today had representatives from all of our schools, and the elementary and middle school people were pointing out, they recognize the high school is where there's the greatest need for support. Because they're, more often than not, they're the target of these violent crimes. I can call it, I guess I'll call it crime, acts. So I just want to say that I think Jeff's right. If there was a time to really think about funding this locally and not waiting for a grant, which ultimately would dry up, this may be the logical time, the appropriate time to between the town budget and the school budget to pay for this. I think part of this would be a town expense, because I believe the way it works is that the resource officer, when school is out, becomes a summer policeman for the town. And so it's a year-round job. Part of the year is in schools, and part of the year is in town. And when there's an emergency, even during the school year, that officer steps up and helps the town if there's a need for the town side. So it probably is going to be, to some degree, a shared expense. I'm not saying 50-50, but it's a shared expense.
Howard, is this going to be per school or one for all schools?
I'm thinking right now, one officer, and the officer would hang his, God bless you, would hang his or her hat at the high school, but float around the buildings. But more often than not, we would expect to see them at the high school.
Okay.
Can I just, before we moved on from the topic of the EPS, thank you, Jeff, for bringing it up, and I think you addressed some of the issues around the teacher staffing issue very well, and I appreciate that, and I think that's really important to get that information out there, and I think you're absolutely right, we don't want to aim for mediocrity, like that may be a template that's not what we aspire to, but while we're looking at it, I think we should also look at areas where we might not be meeting or not be staffing the way the state formula suggests. So if that's mediocrity and we're not there, those are items we want to take a look at, right? And if there's opportunities there to, right, if there's opportunities there, it's also ways to pull levers to change the way we get formula, the way we get funding. So I want to keep that dialogue open through the process, because it's not just about the teacher line item. It works through
Right.
the whole system, and we shouldn't just say, oh, we don't want to be mediocre, so let's ignore it. So, I just want to, thank you for bringing it up.
Oh, Win? Yeah.
I had this thought of, is this formula, does this have anything, does the number of students who go to vocational schools, so if we were to do this comparison between the schools of the same population, since our population is, there's so few of our kids who go on the paths, these other schools send perhaps twice, maybe 3 times the number of students to paths. Does that in any way influence how staffing is figured? Because we have those kids in school all day long, rather than anything going on.
So that's another area, that's a great question, Wynn, and I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd be happy to take a look at it.
I mean, eventually it would,
Seems
because it's gonna just affect what your section sizes are gonna be, because they're not gonna be in your sections. If you've got, instead of,
Except
9
English
kids in
and
paths, you've got
They have to
40.
get, right.
You're gonna have 40 kids who are not in sections during the day, which will eventually wrinkle back to what your section sizes are. But that'll sort itself out as your class loads and sections work themselves out, and as those numbers change, I would expect. So it is representing a cost that is paid to outside instructors, and I'm not sure how that will, it doesn't match one-to-one to what your internal costs are gonna be, because as we sort of talked about, teacher costs are not infinitely flexible, they're sort of quantitative. You add someone or you don't add someone, you add someone half-time or not half-time, they're not infinitely sliceable. And neither are sort of the course offerings, it's sort of either you offer the course or you don't offer the course. And so it sort of depends on the quanta that you're sending, I would expect, and I'm not sure how the costs compare external to internal. My guess is to one significant figure, they're roughly equivalent.
May I add on this? So in part, I think the answer involves looking at graduation requirements. Remember, the students that go to a school like Pass are usually only taking their junior and senior year, and not, and that most of these schools do not offer your traditional school requirements for graduation. Like, for example, you couldn't go there and get your U.S. history or your English class, for example, in most of them. So they're really, the students that are going are juniors and seniors who are opting out of their elective courses, and so therefore going, for example, a music program or a drama program or a speech or all the other classes. They're taking their requirements for graduation at their regular high school and then opting, and then coming back and coming late for the courses they require to graduate. Some of the schools are saying, let's get rid of that and go to saying if they're in let's say a masonry program at Pass, maybe they could demonstrate proficiency in the future for math by their skills as a mason, or science for nursing or whatever, but that's kind of evolving. But I think that the required courses that we offer, it's the electives that are going to take the hit, I think, and that's a shame.
John, we're a third of the way in.
Yeah, thank you.
Pardon me?
We're about a third of the way in. I think we're roughly on
Timekeepers.
pace. Anything more on the high school?
I just had a
Yep.
quick question. You had, Jeff, in your non-staff savings, you mentioned field trips. Is that through elimination of field trips or offloading of the cost to
It was
families?
offloading of costs and charging students for field trips that
Yeah.
are happening, which we still do to some extent, but again, there's been a little bit of a creep back, but not nearly where it was several years ago.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Just a quick note to follow up on Elizabeth's comment. I have the opportunity to see our students in a little less structured environment at a lot of the athletic events. And it's ironic that the adults that tend to get the most attention would be, these particular events are Mr. Shields, Mr. Strout, and Officer Galvin. Students just tend to flock to those people, and it speaks a lot about building relationships with students, so I thought that was a nice point. As athletic director, going through this budget process, my primary objective is fiscal responsibility and ensuring the quality and integrity of the programs for our students to experience these multitude of benefits that you receive and get to participate in while in athletics. It's vital that these programs where young people learn these life lessons, they complement the academic lessons that are taught in the classroom. In addition to our students, our parents, our boosters, and our coaches, some key components to the overall strength of the athletic program is partly the diversity of the athletic offerings and the range of competitive levels for students to explore and to pursue their interests. So in the high school, we have 14 boys and 14 girls athletic offerings, so 50 teams total. That's varsity, junior varsity, and first teams. And we have, out of, I think the number was 515 total enrollment, 413 students participate in athletics, so that's about 80% at the high school. And that number's been it's been very consistent over the past 10 years that I've been involved at Cape Elizabeth. It may fluctuate a percent or two, but 80% is right on par. So that's about 150 boys and 120 girls each season that are participating. And of those, single sport athletes, it's about 37%, dual sport, 32%, and three sport athletes, that's about 31%. And again, that information is in your binder, but did want to highlight a few of those numbers. And in the middle school, we offer 10 boys and 10 girls athletic offerings, so there are about 30 teams for 7th and 8th graders. In middle school, there are about 203 students per season, so that participation number is about 75%. And Again, I think a lot of this is attributed to our community that fully supports the values of education-based athletics, and that overwhelming support from our booster organizations that really help get us past that point where the school side of the budget can't. So I am proposing increases in the following areas: non-personnel. In our dues and fees, there was a $4,100 increase, and that was a result of our league dues and adding unified basketball. For the past 2 years, unified basketball was funded by a grant from Special Olympics, Maine Special Olympics. That grant ends this year, so next year would be the first year of that. There was a $1,300 increase in official fees. That was the result of an increase in their fee structure. There was a $2,000 increase in travel. We've had to rely a little bit more on using charter or using bus companies to transport. It's not something unique to Cape Elizabeth. I think Maine in general, transportation and finding drivers to drive our buses is a huge travel, so we've had to rely on a lot of the bus companies. And another increase, about a $3,000 increase to help with middle school uniforms for boys and girls teams in the spring. So on a on a personnel side, again, that increase of a coach for unified basketball. And aside from that, everything else is pretty much status quo, no changes, and the other line items.
And unified basketball is actually not an addition, it's just the expiration of a grant and the continuation of service.
Correct, correct.
What is unified basketball?
Unified basketball is a program for students with special needs and students in the school to participate together.
It's a very
And
neat program.
it's
very-
probably one of the best experiences of my day, and one of my favorite parts of my day is watching, getting out there to watch unified basketball. It's just an incredible moment to see students working together and just pure sport of it, and the kids just getting along and working together. It's a remarkable experience.
It's been hugely successful. Did we have somebody, the coach, come speak to us once, I think, a couple months ago, or last year maybe? Is that correct? And it's hugely successful is what I took away from that, so.
And the impacts are, unite just during the regular school day, building relationships there as well.
Is it just high school kids, or is it beyond?
Right now, it's high school. I foresee something like this happening at the middle school level soon. But right now, there's a formal league in the high school,
And it's co-ed?
co-ed.
So they do compete with other schools?
Correct.
Okay, great.
They travel and compete.
Just a simple question, how often do we replace uniforms?
Unif-
What's the duration of the uniform?
Uniforms are on a 5-year rotation.
5 years.
Some year, depending on the sport and the condition, that may
Yeah.
need to move up a year, and that's 5 years is pushing it by that,
Yeah.
at that point.
Elizabeth?
Oh, sorry.
So I don't really have a question I'd like to put in my annual plug for athletics in public schools. I feel that, the educational value, the relationship building value are both huge. And there are students that don't necessarily connect with an adult in the building during the day, but they make that connection through athletics, and it's incredibly important. They, you have self-esteem building, and I mean, when athletics are done well, it's just such a wonderful thing for students. And, in this day and age when we're paying attention to, does a student have somebody that they feel is their person? A lot of times athletics provides that opportunity to the students. So, I think a lot of times people think that, in difficult times, athletics, isn't necessary, and I think they are. I think it's incredibly important. So, there we go.
May I speak? I would like to piggyback on that, that I think that's an excellent point. It speaks to being a well-rounded person, and athletics is one vehicle, robotics is another vehicle, but it's just one of them. And I'd also like to speak about the uniforms, which may not seem like a big deal, but having had some children go through, there's a sense of pride to be able to wear a uniform that is respectable, and some of the uniforms are quite shabby at this point, and a little bit old. So it just goes to, they want to feel proud showing up as their team, and it does matter that they have uniforms that can help represent that. So I don't think it's a trivial thing, so thank you for bringing that up.
Last point I'd like to sort of just drive home, like, I think again, when you look across schools, across Maine, across the nation, the participation rates that we have seem extraordinarily high. I don't know what they are in other schools, but they seem really high, and that's really admirable. And again, that's something where we have to decide, you know, this is who we are, this is things that we value, and we're getting really good results with that. And so it may not be the way other schools are doing it, other communities are doing it, but this is what we're doing. And those high levels of participation rates really speak to me that we're doing something right. And being able to take what you've got and then add to that by adding things like unified basketball, I think is fantastic. And you're reaching a population that now is participating and driving participation rates even higher than already high numbers. And so I think that's really laudable. And then just a last point, just so people can put it in perspective, you mentioned a couple of few $1,000 increases in fees, just to give people an overall view on your total budget. What's the total budget numbers that are moving around? So, you know, this year to that last year in terms of the total budget numbers.
So operational expenses?
Yeah.
Now that, I'm looking at a 4% increase, so an increase of $10,000, roughly.
$10,000,
Yeah.
is that personal or non-personal, or is that?
That's non-personnel, yeah.
So about 10,000
About 10,
non-personnel,
yeah.
on a total budget of?
Operational is, for 17-18, it was it's like 6 font here, 226,000.
About a $10,000 increase on a $200,000 budget, which is about a 5% or so number?
It was about 4%,
4%, yeah.
4%, yeah, a little over 4%.
And most of those are driven by costs for participating in your current activities that you have no control over, it
Yep.
sounds like.
Official fees,
Yeah,
dues and fees, which was a league
Yeah.
increase, and then travel,
yeah.
and then middle school uniforms.
Okay, thank you. So. Troy?